Social justice means applying the law equally to all people, but in practice, that doesn't always happen. I'm John Gonzalez. I'm here at my law partner, Jack DeRora. We practice law, we seek social justice. On this show, we reveal the conflict between the two.
You know, for a while, it was just us in the office over a cup of coffee talking about the news of the day. With social justice issues dominating our culture, our focus became, how do we as lawyers make a difference?
And now it's not just us. Today we have back with us Reverend Dr. Timothy C. Ahrens, and he's going to discuss religion's role in politics. Welcome back.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Jack, I get the impression that most of us go to church and we expect to hear about salvation or morality and scripture. We don't anticipate political endorsements. And as a lawyer, and probably non-lawyers know, there's a tax code that prevents religious institutions from serving as political machines, kind of keeping with this thought of separation of church and state. But at the same time, what does it say when our leaders, our religious leaders, aren't allowed their rights to free speech? Because they're usually talking about something that's important to them, or they wouldn't be up there saying, don't vote for Bill Clinton or vote for Donald Trump, right?
Are you asking me to assess whether their First Amendment rights are violated, or if they are violated, that's permissible? I'm not clear.
You don't really have to, because the Supreme Court did that for us, actually. And in a case in 1992, this church in Texas, of all places, spent $44,000 on an ad that called Bill Clinton a sinner and warned Christians against voting for him. And the court said that is not allowed. They stripped its exemption. Now, churches can do it. They just won't have their exemption anymore.
Right.
But basically, if I understand in a general sense, if, Reverend, you wanted to express your political views, as long as you're not doing it on the pulpit to your congregation or in that sense, then it's okay. It's using the pulpit in your church. And I say that in a general sense because I was a little shocked at the pastor that was at the inauguration for Trump. Did you happen to see what he said or did?
No.
You're our second guest that didn't watch the inauguration. Yeah. I'm shocked. No, I'm not shocked, actually. It was a hard thing to watch. But basically, here's what he said. He said, I have the honor and privilege of being a senior pastor at 180 Church, and this is in Detroit. And we were blessed last month to have President Donald Trump come to Detroit, Michigan. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine a president coming to a city and calling a pastor like me, who was born and raised on the east side of Detroit? And obviously very proud to be called by the president. And then at the inauguration, he started talking about the millimeter miracle, about the assassin's bullet that missed Trump, and that God saved Trump, and essentially saying God saved Trump so he could be the president of the United States. And, Reverend, I see that coming to church and honoring the presidency and the country is a good thing. But then when this pastor goes to the inauguration, he was also at the Republican convention, now supporting Trump and almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Is like he's a deity. I think it's crossing the line. Yeah, and I don't know, Jack, how do you feel about that?
I don't like anybody talking religion in public for the purpose of trying to persuade me, primarily because while I might be spiritual and a regular churchgoer, I am just so skeptical of another person's point of God's role in our life. And I think if you want to believe that, that's fine, but you and I may not be worshiping the same God. That's the way I look at it.
But again, we're talking about individual individuals right now. So we have this pastor from Detroit, and then you have the was she a bishop at the
Bishop? I think pronounced Buddy. I think
Buddy.
Yeah, Buddy.
And she took the opportunity when she was addressing her congregation in church. Now, the difference is the pastor from Detroit was just doing it kind of on his own, being invited to these events. And here's the bishop in church giving the president advice in what I would consider to be very political issues. How do you square those two?
I square it easily. The first pastor is looking at divine right as bringing Trump to the presidency. I don't think I'm overstating that. Divine intervention. The bishop is merely conveying the gospel message, which is mercy. Please have mercy. I don't think that was political. I think that was just communicating the New Testament to somebody who isn't politics.
Reverend, what do you think?
I agree with Jack. I think that Bishop Buddy was courageous, actually, in speaking directly to the president in that setting, calling for him to be merciful. It was interesting as I watched that sequence back and forth. I mean, her talking, him responding by paying attention. He was with her for the first minute or so. And when she was talking about LGBT youth and trans youth and stuff, I saw him attending to that. But when she walked into the area of refugees and migrants, you could see something click off in him. It's like, I'll listen to you speak about the families, but now you've gone too far, right? So it was an interesting, it's a dance, I think, in some ways, and she tripped him in her steps that she took, as I saw his face and his reaction. But, it's funny, I saw a comic playing this out and saying, it's kind of hard, it's hard enough to get people to go to church, but then you start preaching and you look down in the front row and you say, Jack, I'm talking to you. Jack, it's like you get picked out of the crowd. It's like, wait a second, I didn't come for this. So it is a bit awkward, to say the least. So I thought, well, that's an interesting way to look at it. Like, it's not why I went to church to get picked on.
How would you handle an invitation from, if we're using the president, Donald Trump, to speak from, a religious standpoint or biblical perspective at one of his events like this, the Detroit pastor? Would it be something you would embrace? And
well, it's interesting you ask that because in his reelection campaign for President Barack Obama, and the White House asked me to do the opening prayer for the reelection. So we were here in Columbus, and I offered the prayer, and the kickoff to the campaign happened that day, and it was interesting. So I've actually been in that place. I've been in the place where Governor Strickland asked me to do the opening invocation when he was governor. So you sort of First of all, everyone can be prayed for, right? It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I think everyone deserves a request for prayer, whether you are facing your imminent death or, a very difficult surgery, or you are really in a trying and challenging time, or whether you're running for an office. I don't have any problem with saying, we offer a prayer for the family, for the person, for the circumstances. That it's like this. This is the way I look at it. We used to say prayers in this one softball league I was in, and as long as before the game, and as long as the prayer was, we're praying that that this be, a well played game, that we all have great sportsmanship. The prayer that really got to me, though, was the one when the coach on the other team prayed that God would bless his team to win. And I was like, wait a second. So I'm on the other sideline saying, I'd like to make an addendum to that prayer, right? I want to talk to God about this too, for my sake, right? So I think that's where people feel you cross the line. It's like, I'm praying for the victory of the one, right? If you're praying for the welfare, the goodness, that's one thing. But when you cross that line, I think that is different.
I was always curious whether God actually cared who won a game, because you say
clearly not.
Yeah,
I played on, so.
Notre Dame didn't win.
Right.
But there was some controversy about the OSU players. A group of them are very religious, and they were praying, and they thought that God gave them that victory.
Right.
And I've heard a couple of people support that view, but others are like, wait a minute,
So here's what my take on that game, by the way, is, basically it was the Catholics against the Evangelicals.
I like that.
All these guys are praying to Jesus, and like the Catholics, wait, they've got the priest up there with them. That's pretty nice. That's daunting, So the Catholics versus Evangelicals. The Evangelicals won this round. I don't know that it'll happen next year, but we'll see.
Well, let me go back to my question.
But here's an interesting thing. I remember a conversation I had years ago in college with Walter Mondale. And Walter was at that time the vice president and was visiting the campus in Minnesota, where he'd gone to school, where his wife and he met. And he said there were two things that were required at every dinner in my home. We were allowed to talk about two things and only two things. One was religion and one was politics. Somewhere we've gotten this idea that you can't talk about those two things together. We have this veneer of appropriateness. Well, that's all sort of broken down. The curtain has been pulled back on The Wizard of Oz. And a lot of folks who have been pulling that curtain back, we may not like what they're saying when they get to that moment, right? And so the question is, you don't leave that exchange. You stay with it and talk it through and work it through. I don't, so I have a problem. I had another experience some years back where I was supposed to do the opening prayer for a rally for Sherrod Brown when he was running for the Senate. This is not this time, but before this. I've been around forever, so it's probably back in the 1800s or something. I don't know when he was first running. Anyway, so I get a call. This is supposed to be a Sunday afternoon thing. I love telling this story because I get a call Saturday night around 10 o'clock saying the Union Hall that we were going to meet in, we're not going to have an opening prayer there, right? I said, well, how is a prayer going to hurt you? It doesn't matter where you are, if you're outside or in a Union Hall or in a church. How's it going to hurt you to not have a prayer? Well, we have people that are against prayer. And I said, that's sad. Mm-hmm. That's really sad. So I said, well, I've always thought prayer is a good thing, no matter who does it and who it's for. So I get a call that Sunday afternoon from Sherrod Brown, and he is pissed. He's really mad that they dropped it. I mean, he got the agenda, and he says, I had asked for you to offer that prayer, knowing that you would be thoughtful about everybody in the state of Ohio, everybody who is engaged in this effort, right? And he said, I was so sorry. I said, well, I told him what I said to them. So I think this it's not Republicans and Democrats and the prayers on either side. It's how we approach it. I think it's. I go back to Walter Mondale. I mean, I think we're very engaged in either the effect of politics on our lives, or maybe more so the politics themselves and engaging those politics. And we also are spiritual beings. So it's all of us have something, a higher power of some sort working in us and on us. And to sort of separate those two things doesn't seem natural to me. Anyway.
When you were talking about, though, that you were asked by Obama and you were asked by Strickland, my assumption is that those venues and the people align somewhat with your own personal beliefs, as opposed to maybe being asked by the Trump campaign or the J.D. Vance campaign.
Right.
And,
they haven't called.
They haven't called you, but I assume you would say that would be okay because you would, like you said, everybody deserves a prayer.
Right.
the thing that jumps out at me with the Detroit pastor, if I can just go back to him one more time, is that it seems to me he was just being used for political purposes, and he allowed himself to be used. And I see a problem with that. I mean, Donald Trump didn't pick a black pastor from Detroit out of some religious concept that he wanted to hear, right?
Right.
He did it for purely political purposes.
Yeah.
I hate to be that cynical. But do you have a criticism that this pastor still took that up, even probably knowing, he was being used politically?
Well, it's interesting because, Billy Graham was pastor to many presidents and, sort of a spiritual confidant. One of my friends and mentors in ministry and in life was Tony Campolo, who Tony was a mentor and an advisor, spiritual advisor to Jimmy Carter, and then on to Bill Clinton as well. And so I think it's interesting. There are camps, right? I mean, you're unfortunately, in the biblical sense, speaking from a biblical sense, the ones who are called to pray in the scripture about the powers that be are called by God and not by the powers that be. And when God calls a prophet, when God calls the one to speak, usually the powers that be do not like what that person or prophet says. So you have sort of the conflict that you had with Bishop Buddy, right? Where you really are uncomfortable with what's coming your way. But the same could be said on the other side. I think J.D. Vance questioned the bishops this week as they came out. The U.S. Catholic bishops came out in support of those who are migrants and refugees. And I say, thanks be to God. That's what they should do, right? I mean, in terms of, in terms of the faith. And Vance accused them of just wanting the money that the government gave for them to benefit and reap that money. And I thought, I didn't hear that in what they were saying. And it's not like the government gives you a lot of money to take care of the problem of people who've crossed the borders legally or illegally to settle in our land. So it was a very cynical response on his part when he could have heard that as a genuine cry. So I think, whoever it is, for example, the whole idea that bullet that missed Trump, if you will, or just glanced him, I want to hear more about that. In other words, I want to hear more about the spirituality or the faith that brings a person to that conclusion. And I don't take it as crazy thinking. I believe that it comes out of a genuine connection to that particular candidate that deserves to be heard, right? So that's the way I approach it, at least. I want to hear more about that person's theology, more about their understanding. So anyway.
The part that bothers me is the difference between sort of a neutral, open-hearted prayer that wishes the best for mankind,
right,
as opposed to using religion to justify something.
Right.
And which leads me to the thought, I think, from Richard Rohr, which is, prophets tell you what you need to hear.
Right.
And I don't know if he used the word charlatans, but maybe he did. And charlatans tell you what you want to hear.
Right.
And I think we get a lot of the what people want to hear dressed up as spiritual nourishment, and it's not. It's really just politics behind a collar.
Right. No, you're right. And Abraham Joshua Heschel had a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book called The Prophets, but he says of the prophets in the scripture, he says, when the prophet is speaking, God is raging. So, if it reaches the point that God has laid it upon the prophet's heart to open his mouth and speak, watch out, because there is fire coming, right? And so that hits everybody, right? So a true prophet is an equal opportunity condemner. So, a true prophet doesn't miss anybody. So anyway.
It's difficult for me. I've read the Bible. years ago, somebody gave me that Bible. They call it the 365-day Bible, where you read a passage every day, and by the end of the year, you've read the entire Bible. And I passed that down to my daughter, and she loved it. So I've been through the Bible in different passages, but I'm not a scholar in any way. I can't remember things, but I feel that sometimes I'm at a disadvantage when somebody's trying to say, well, God is against gay people because, in Paul's letters make it very clear that God hates gays, and then they start citing it, right? Yeah,
not true.
So what's the response to that? Because then they quote the section, and it sounds like Paul was trying to say, "Hey, this is not good and not the way God wants things."
So this is a really good question, because you asked before we got started the question of, in relation to sexual identity, gender issues, that kind of thing, to say that it's all clearly laid out in the Bible in terms of the question of homosexuality in the Bible is just not interested in it. I mean, it's just not a topic the Bible's interested in. Paul glances things, but only in 3 passages, and they have to do with something that's not even related to sexual attraction of men for men. They leave women out, but men for men. It's about a thing called pederasty, and pederasty is a man owning a younger child or teen for sexual purposes. So that's what he's actually addressing. That's not a covenanted, same-sex, healthy relationship. That's abusive, right? That we would call that child abuse, right? And that's exactly what it is. So I hope that everybody's against that, right? So it's not like, okay, let's put that over here because Paul was speaking out to an abuse of children by men, which was part of the Greco-Roman world. And it was acceptable in certain parts to do that. So thanks be to God that Paul spoke to that, but that's not what we're looking at in 21st century relationships. But see, the problem then becomes if you claim it's in the Bible, but it's not, then you got to look back and say, so what is your agenda here? What are you trying to say if in fact you can't back up with critical biblical evidence and scholarship the statements you make? Then it becomes, it's your issue, not the Bible's issue. So stop hiding behind a shield called Holy Scripture and tell us what your problem is with people who are in same-sex relationships. I mean, so that's where we try to get to. I try to get to with people. And what's interesting is that just a couple weeks ago, one of my professors at Yale, who was a leader in conservative Christian evangelical movement, Richard Hayes, passed away. And the op-ed in the New York Times talked about him changing, his beliefs about gay people as he moved through his scholarship and his life. And I sent this to one of my classmates from YDS, from Yale Divinity School. He said, yeah, it's too bad that Richard took 40 more years to figure out what all of us knew 40 years before him. And he called himself a scholar. I mean, it's like, so, we hail people, oh, he came to see the light. Well, yeah, and he brought a lot of people down into the darkness in between. So, it's like we have to look at how we get to where we are. So anyway.
What I have started to learn, probably way late in my life, is that a lot of times, like you say, people will give you the Bible quote, the verse, the lines. But there's always a historical perspective that is lacking in their understanding, and that's hard to come about. I mean, for people that can read the Bible, and this is what I'm reading, we're interpreting it in our own time instead of, like you said, what was going on back in Paul's time.
Right.
And I was telling Jack, I've been reading this author, Sarah Rubin, and she was talking about Paul and his letters and trying to relate what he was saying back into his time. But I think it's a dishonesty, or it's disingenuous for people to do that without trying to say, well, here's some historical context that you got to consider, right?
Right.
One of my favorite examples is money is the root of all evil, when it's really the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money. But what do you think about the passage about the camel in the eye of the needle.
Yeah,
I mean, are we supposed to not? Yeah, right. So, are we supposed to hate Elon Musk because he's got more money than everybody, or he's not going to heaven? I mean, you get it on both sides, right?
Right. Well, as I said, sometimes a prophetic word, or in this case, a word from the parables, is an equal opportunity. Brings everybody down at once. I think, in that particular case, Jesus was trying to say, this is really hard to do. So you've got to figure out how, metaphorically speaking, this is hard for you to get into the kingdom of heaven the way you're going, right? So take a look at your life, turn this around and come back when you're ready. And the poor guy turns around and walks away and never returns. So, I think, so this is interesting because I think one of the things I was going to say is we live in various cultures, subcultures, if you will. Like both of you are attorneys, so you live in the subculture of the law, right? As a pastor, I live in the subculture of religious life. But I also live in other parts of the culture, right? I am part of other social fabric and other things that happen. I think the question is to me that's important is, who is your God in the midst of the subcultures and cultures you're a part of? What is the deity that you worship? And that gets back, Gonzo, that gets back to the question of, the root of all evil, or, getting through the eye of the needle. What are your commandments? What are your rules? And I just saw the film The Apprentice, and I was aware, I was thinking about this for today, especially, that Donald Trump was, if you will, raised in the school of Roy Cohn, right, who made his mark as a young man in the McCarthy hearings, calling people out as communists. And he had 3 rules. Cohn had 3 rules. I don't know if you've heard these rules or if you've seen the film. Number 1, always attack. Always attack. And number 2, never admit you're wrong. Never admit wrongdoings, ever. And number 3, always claim victory even if defeated. Now, I can tell you from my take on Donald Trump, he was a great apprentice. He has followed the master's rules well, right? This is what he learned. So in the culture that he was in the subculture, in my mind, his true God were these rules set forth, right? And he lives by those rules. So everything else becomes secondary or tertiary or further away from his core values than the ones that guide him. So I think the question is, what are your guiding principles? What are your guiding rules? I always say one of the things that Jesus, he dumbed down Judaism for Christians by saying you got 613 laws, and the only 2 that matter are love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, love your neighbor as yourself. So he took 613 and turned it into 2. But if that becomes your core value, then everything else follows from there, right? Putting God first, neighbor second. So maybe that's what those Buckeyes are actually saying when they're saying, I follow Jesus. Like, yeah, the guy on my left, the guy on my right, man, I love these guys. These are my neighbors. They're bashers, these 2, but they bring it down. They protect me. So, I love God and these guys. So
what does it say for us collectively when those core values that Trump learned in The Apprentice, as an apprentice, have got him what he wants out of life, right? He's been successful as he defines it, I'm assuming, by doing those 3 things, as opposed to following biblical core values.
Right.
And a lot of people support it, obviously, because they voted him in as president. What's that, in your mind, say about, why should we go with the biblical core values when, geez, we can, deny, and, we always have victory and we can go that
and
route.
Attack, yeah.
I mean, I think it's very attractive for people.
Well, for one thing, you always control the narrative when you follow those three values. You're always setting the initiative out there. One of the gifts of Donald Trump to this world, for those who see it as a great gift, God bless you for that. But one of his gifts is he controls the narrative all the time, right? And so we wake up in the morning. It didn't matter if he was in the office or not in the office. We were talking about him all the time. So he controls the narrative, right? And of course, when he has the bully pulpit of the presidency, that's a very clear control of the narrative because you literally have the main mic, right? But yeah, I mean, you got to ask yourself. There's a funny story, when he was out campaigning in California, and made the comment that if Jesus had counted the votes in the last election, he would have won California. And I loved this meme that appeared online after he said that. It shows Jesus peeking out from behind a cloud saying, "I want nothing to do with this." It's like, I'm not in this. This is not me. So I love that. It's like, no, that's not me. I didn't do that. So poor Jesus gets dragged into so many things in the name of Jesus. So.
I'd like to get back to something we talked about just a few minutes ago, because this is really bothering me, and that is how I see religion pushing itself. Well, I shouldn't say religion, certain groups pushing religion. So we have the evangelical right pushing its narrative about certain things, which to me is inconsistent with the gospel, because I'm like Gonzo. I've read some part of the Bible. Nobody's ever accused me of being a scholar, but I have this firm memory of Jesus saying, go out 2 by 2s, go to the villages, stay in a house where you're received. If they reject you, walk away and shake the sand from your sandals. He doesn't say, stick around and preach until they're exhausted.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
That's what he doesn't say.
Yeah.
But yet we have forces.
He says, retreat.
Yeah.
Run away.
Yes.
So,
he does the Monty Python thing. Run away. But we have groups that are trying to force religion.
Oh, yeah.
And I see the LifeWise Academy here in the state. In fact, they got the legislature to buy off on their program.
Right.
What do you attribute this to?
Well, again, at its core values, Christianity, like other religions, I happen to be a Christian and a Christian pastor, so I, lean in strongly to the values that come from my faith, right? But the core values, twisted and turned, don't help the person you're trying to convert, if you will, or turn around. There's a wonderful story about one of our missionaries in India many, many years ago. 2 Christian missionaries, and they were in a Hindu part, mostly Hindu part of India. And people would always ask them, why don't you have a cross out front? And they said, that's not what we're here to live the gospel and to care for you with the gospel values of concern for the poor and healing. And one day, this huge crowd approaches this rural hospital, and from the midst of the crowd parts, and they pull out about a 15-foot cross that they then dig a hole and with cement put it in front of the hospital. And the crowd is completely Hindu. And they said, if you're not going to declare who you are and why you do what you do, we will do it for you. And to me, that's the true, in other words, this academy, if they teach good values, good for them. If they're trying to convert somebody to Christian values, when in fact they may be, Taoist, they may be from Confucius. They may be Buddhist. They may be Hindu. They may be something completely different. And that gets to be a problem then, because that's not, to me, the core of the gospel itself. The core of the gospel is to live it. What St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel all the time, and if you must, use words, right? So I think that summarizes the way a Christian should live, right? Just do it, right? Just do it, like Nike says.
Sometimes, Jack, when you talk about what's, the religion trying to insert itself in different areas like the schools, I often think of our stance on Second Amendment and guns, right? Because people feel they have a right to carry a gun because the Second Amendment says it. And Jack, I think you think that just because the First Amendment says there should be a separation of church and state, that there should be. And a lot of people just don't see that. I don't see it with the Second Amendment as being this thing that's written in stone for all ages that can never be changed. And also, I'm not so sure that religion being a part of schools or a part of government is a bad thing. Because what you were saying, Reverend, resonates with me. It's really what we're doing with religion, not where we're doing it.
Oh, I agree with you, but what I'm objecting to is I'm not seeing what Tim is talking about with these two Christian missionaries leading the life of the gospel.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is people trying to force their views on other people. That's the objectionable part. It's, I have to tell you, I'm just a real skeptic when the few times people come up to me and they say, I'm a Christian. I always say to myself, you don't need to tell me. I'm going to figure this out on my own.
It's kind of like on your first date saying to the woman you really want to make an impression with, I am a very handsome man. You didn't need to say, I already saw that. That's why we're going out, right? So
Right.
I got that. So just sort of be yourself, right? Don't try to force yourself. There's a funny thing, Jack, I know you grew up Catholic, and you are Catholic, right? That's your background. When I was a kid in elementary school, all the Catholic kids 2 days a week would go out to CCD classes, right? So they would cross the field at like 3 o'clock or 2:30, and I'd be like, all my friends were leaving school. It was like this movement across this field over to the Catholic Church. And it's like, I want to be Catholic, man. They're all leaving school. And well, how is that different from what these guys are doing today? It's like, we'll put you on a bus and give you pizza for lunch. It's like a better deal. So, so we've been, and it is a dance. I think we've been doing this dance in one form or another for many, many years. And depends on which side of the dance floor we stand, I think.
You were talking about the meme with Jesus looking around the cloud. I've seen the same one in two different ways than you've described. One is Jesus is kind of looking out and he says, I saw what you just did. That's all it says, right? But the other one that just strikes me is he's looking out and he says, flood it again. And it just different perspectives, right? And I think when I think about the conversations you and I have had, Jack, about it, you don't like the power of the government to be forcing any religion on anybody, but certainly the types of things that you disagree with.
Whether I disagree with them or not, I don't want to have that discussion. And I really am tired of evangelical groups speaking out so loudly about their view of the gospel. No, lead your life. Do what you can to be a moral person. You can tout your efforts. And if your efforts resonate with people, they'll join you. But quit trying to tell me that you've got the corner market, I'm getting that wrong. You've got the market cornered on virtue and that you are the sole source. I don't want to hear that.
Well, what I hear, though, Reverend, you saying is that there is a big role for religion to be played as long as it's done, I'm going to say accurately, and maybe that's not the right phrase, but as long as it's done the right way, religion has to play a part in all this.
Well, I see the values to be outstanding values. So, however you come to them, but, as we have an ever-growing country with a whole range of people, including those who used to consider themselves Christians and have walked away from that because of what they've seen, right? I see that it's the values that have to translate and not the language of one text or another, not one sacred text over another. And I think that's, maybe I'm living in na-na land, but it seems to me that if we're translating the values, that's important. I also see, by the way, I think the Christian church is going through a real change within itself right now. I think there are people who are, in the name of Jesus, are claiming all sorts of things, and I would say that they don't always claim them from the gospel texts of Christianity. They claim them from the laws of Paul or they see the angels doing battle in Revelation and say, well, that's Jesus, right? And there's others who, try to continue to follow Jesus. There's a lot of struggle within the Christian world itself. I guess that's the first thing to say. And between people who believe themselves to be true Christians and people who believe themselves to be true followers of Jesus, right? I don't know. It's hard to compartmentalize, but I'm seeing it's winners and losers kind of attitude that has taken over the faith in a way that feels like the Crusades all over again. It's
Sure.
a strange reality. Anyway.
Well,
I think it crosses over other religions probably as well. I mean, I don't think it's unique to only Christianity, but because of the vastness of Christianity and its impact in our civil life today especially, I think that's where it plays itself out most obviously. But I think other religions are struggling with that too.
What was the Emperor Constantine? What was the Council of I want to say Council of Trent. What was it?
Nicaea.
Nicaea, yeah. Maybe we need
323.
another one of those
Yeah.
to get us straightened out.
Well,
No, that one went the wrong way, Gonzo.
So Gonzo, this is so.
Tell me-
here's what I
tell
love
me how
about
I'm wrong.
Here's what I love about Constantine
Yeah.
converting to Christianity. True story. So I'm in Rome when I hear this story, right? So here's what he did. The whole battle started when his all of the horsemen in his army, the cavalry rose up against him. Sorry, blanked on cavalry.
Sorry.
The cavalry rose up against him, and he gathered together the troops, and they surrounded the cavalry and beat the cavalry. And he saw this vision in the stars. He believed it was Jesus and all this kind of stuff. First thing he did, as a Christian, these are quotation marks I'm using, as a Christian, was gather the cavalry in their barns, take them back to their barns, lock the doors, and burn the barns to the ground. So that's the first act he has as a Christian. And then he builds a church there on top of the dust and the ash of that place. So when we sort of need to know our stories, which, by the way, I didn't know the full story until I was in that church. And the story came out on how this church started in the 4th century. It's like, oh my God, it's unbelievable, right? But we have, that's what I mean. There's warfare that is within that we've got to figure out, and it gets played out on the world stage all the time. So,
I think you captured it all well. Religion is becoming a matter of winners and losers, and that's really disheartening.
Right.
One of the we had a brief discussion about end times and the prophecies, but one of the things that were told to me about it was how we know it's the end times for different factors, but one of them was Christianity is now worldwide, that it's everywhere. And I'm assuming you'd probably agree with that there's probably very few places on this earth that haven't been touched by Christianity.
Positively and negatively.
Right.
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it has a global reach like no other religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I was reading some stuff about Francis's years as Pope. He now has reached the point where something like 75% of the cardinals who will vote on the next Pope were chosen by Francis to be cardinals. And that apparently is one of the largest percentages of cardinals. And one of the reasons is he's established places where cardinals are in places where they haven't been before because of the spread of Christianity. So it is truly a global, the Catholic Church, for those within it, they go, yeah, we already knew that. But it's a very global movement. I mean, it has global implications. So,
have you seen the movie Conclave?
Yes.
And my wife loved it. I haven't seen it yet.
I loved it too. And at first I was watching it thinking, why is there so much trouble within the Catholic Church about, well, when you get to the end, you can get why, right? The why becomes clear at the end. But it's a very powerful film.
I thought it was fabulous.
I think it should win Best Film, but I just loved it. Yeah.
Well, as always, it's illuminating and appreciate it. I
love what you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time. Thanks.
Wonderful having you with us. Our thanks to WOSU and our sound engineer, Dalton Jones. If you like what you've heard, tell a friend. We want it to be more than just us. We want it to be all of us. We'll be back with another social justice issue in another week or two. Until then, so long.